Good evening. It is now 5:31. This is the regularly scheduled Environmental Commission meeting. Today is April 14th, 2022. Commission Vice Chair Christian Adams, would you like us to begin the meeting?
Yes, let's start the meeting.
Start the meeting. Let's have roll call. Commission Vice Chair Christian Adams.
Present.
Commissioner Carol Parker.
Present.
Commissioner Mark O'Connor.
Here.
And Commissioner Robert Switzler.
Present.
Excellent. Let the record show we have 4 commissioners present tonight, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Chamomile. Will we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Parker, you want to lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Parker. Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda?
We have no changes. We just have one addition. We added the presentation tonight, the path to net zero. So the slides are now available for the public.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chamomile. Any oral communications?
We do have one. Our first and only speaker is Gerald Ann Kessler. Ms. Kessler, if you could state your name for the record, you have a full 3 minutes. And thank you for coming tonight.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm Geraldine Kessler, and I would like to speak about the environmental nightmare housing project on Melba Road that is slated to take down a mature grove of Torrey pines, 173 trees, 30 smaller trees and native shrubs, along with demoing not 1 but 3 beautiful historical homes built in 1938 or possibly earlier, all based on the ill-fated density bonus law AB 2345. The latest update on this environmental nightmare project is Torrey Pacific and Brian Staver are refusing to sign off on 2 cypress historical boundary trees as heritage trees, which we feel were possibly planted by Anton van Ambershurst, who was the original owner of the Botanical Gardens and founding member of the Water District, and who also owned the Staver property. Brian is also objecting to the row of mature Torrey pines on Melba Road that are city-owned trees being made as a grove of heritage trees. I don't think he has any say in the city-owned trees, but nevertheless, it demonstrates how out of touch he is with the Encinitas and the Climate Action Plan, or working with the neighborhood. I also would like to mention that the Historical and Cultural Report by Cogstone does not comment on the other 2 buildings being built in 1938. When we spoke with the architectural historian, they stated that when 2 or more historical buildings are on a property, they can be placed in a category that qualifies them for a possible cohesive collection of historical district. Added with the unique character of the tree line, this represents the rural look of Encinitas in the 30s, which is not present at any place in Encinitas. I have already talked to the 3 of the local Native American tribes about this property. They had stated in the Cogstone report this area is positive for cultural resources and are very disturbed with the trees being removed. Lastly, I wanted to mention how convoluted the process has been. Our group has diligently been asking for the records of this environmental nightmare housing project so that we can inform the neighborhood and educate them. The second submission was never completely done. It left many unanswered questions that we thought would be answered on the 3rd, which still remains unanswered. We have several engineers in our working group, and they are left confused and disillusioned by this process being acceptable. The onslaught of confusing and inadequate documents that do not tell the full story of the hydrology, the drainage, and the housing requirements, and the biology report is jacked up, only mentions lizards. We all know this is not true. We hear coyotes and owls and see bobcats, and of course the monarch butterflies are ample, along with many other species. This process has left us feeling like they want us to spin our wheels. This is not fair to the longtime tax-paying senior residents of the community. That is why I continue to ask to help the community make this beautiful piece of sacred property into open space with soft green infrastructure funding. It's ideal for the outdoor STEM lab, the annex to the botanical gardens, or similar setup to the San Diego Park. Please support the community with fundraising for this last piece of open space in old and new Encinitas. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. That
Can I have a-
concludes oral, go ahead.
Can I ask you to repeat the name of the person that is refusing to sign off on the heritage tree?
Oh, it's the owner of the property. That's Brian Staver. I don't know how much play he has in the.
So, I'm sorry, what's his name?
Brian Staver.
Brian
Tory
Staver, okay.
Pacific, or Tory Pacific.
Thank you.
And that concludes oral communications.
Thank you. Our next on the agenda is the presentation. Joseph Galbadon, probably messed up your last name there, from SDG&E, is going to be presenting the path to net zero.
Yes, excellent. Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Joga Baldin. I'm a local resident as well as public affairs manager for SDG&E and the North Coast Territory, which includes Vista, Oceanside, all the way down the coast to Del Mar. What I wanted to do was to share some of the great stuff that our subject matter experts have always been coming up with. And as it worked out, we have not only, I think things are colliding quite well in that we have this great new topic coming out, and this is the pathway to net zero. So it's very timely. It's just only released last week. So, okay, first slide. Thank you. So in partnership with UCSD's David Victor, Boston Consulting Group, and the Black and Veatch organization, our study came out with some interesting results, which really represent kind of our view of it. And what's unique to this study is that it really centers on reliability, right? How are we going to get to net zero and make all these changes and shift the bulk away from gas, bulk of use away from gas to electricity? So this is what's the important pieces, and we came up with 3 different approaches to getting there. One is certainly the use of clean electricity, which is already underway, but also then the use of clean fuels that can be hydrogen or some other technology that may develop in the future, as well as carbon capture. And if you look at the slide to the right side of the slide, by 2045, this study projects that we're at a deficit of about 68 million metric tons of carbon that we still have to get rid of. Where does that come from? Well, we already know that the electricity side has already reached to 100% renewable energy. And so we've got a little bit leftovers in the transportation sector, most likely coming from the medium and heavy duty sector, and a little bit related to buildings and other industrial uses. So, and a little bit from agriculture. But this does comply with the goals of SB 100 and for carbon neutrality by 2045. Next slide. So there's some key takeaways that we have here that I wanted to share. One, again, is really, this is the first study that's focused on the NERC requirements for reliability. And NERC is the North American Reliability Corporation. They're a nonprofit. They have the international regulatory authority for not only North America, but also Canada. For North America, they also roll up to FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So moving on, we took a look at clean fuels as well. as an affordable way to accelerate decarbonization. It not only takes place of reducing fossil fuels, but also, more importantly, the generation of electricity as well. For affordability is key, and I think we've seen so many policy issues arise, such as the NEM proceeding and how non-solar customers are subsidizing solar customers. And we think that there's two issues in there. One, that rates need to be adjusted somehow so that they're less expensive on all customers. There's a lot of items that social programs or public purpose programs that are layered in on customers' bills. And so these, we believe, need to be shifted off to the state budget. But there's also an equity issue in some of these issues here in terms of the transition and full electrification. Next slide. It's clear that clean energy is certainly the way to go, clean electricity, and the way it will support the other transitions of the sectors, such as transportation. And really, the goal there is realizing that we are moving towards an all-electric vehicle fleet to the extent possible at medium duty or light duty, medium duty, and we will have some needs to support heavy-duty vehicles as well through clean energy. Building electrification is another way that we'll be using electric space and water heaters to help support the home use and buildings, and then, of course, certainly industry as well. So all of that is supported by the electrification of the energy sector. Okay, next slide. So key, as you can see here, there's a couple of key components. We believe that consumption will continue to rise as we continue to shift away from, shift to more electrification. But also then to match that and to support that, you're going to need a grid that helps support your net peak loads. And so that's something where we're going to be looking at our infrastructure and the reliability we have in order to support the growth in consumption. Next slide. Of course, everybody is interested in the RPS or your electric supply portfolio. Our studies look at not only where we are today, but some of the areas that we need to grow in the future. One of the interesting opportunities is in a clean fuel, such as hydrogen. And we're looking by 2045 that can make a significant contribution to moving away from some of our fossil fuels that support the generation capacity. It's also interesting to note that in the state, I think we're growing at about 1 gigawatt of utility scale solar in the last decade. And really this model tells us that beginning in 2023, across the state, we need to be growing 8 gigawatts of solar and approximately 2 gigawatts of battery storage every year until 2030, I believe it's 2035. Okay, so next slide. Of course, electrifying transportation is something that we've got a good start on here in San Diego, not only with the growth of EVs, but also partnerships between Sandag, between the county, SDG&E, and other cities to increase the number of EV chargers in the region. And so this not only looks at this slide, not only looks at the number of vehicles that we need to grow to and where they need to be, but also the number of chargers that we need to get to. And certainly it's not only just SDG&E chargers, but can come to us from a number of other players, whether it's Tesla, EVgo, the Volkswagen settlement funds, and that kind of thing. So it's an important piece of the infrastructure that needs to take place in order to move away from the fossil fuels. To support those chargers, the grid also needs to stay reliable. Okay, next slide. Building decarbonization, the commission has already started. Water heaters and electrifying space heaters is something that we have in the city, and this is something that we should continue to grow, again, as a strategy to reduce greenhouse gases. So I know that other cities are considering it. I think Monday, the city of Del Mar will be considering or hearing a presentation from the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and then on Tuesday, the city of Carlsbad will be reviewing their own possible action. Next slide. So clean fuels are definitely an important way of getting to net zero. We've seen where they've been a suitable replacement, not only for the generation of energy or storage, but also we have NCTD, for example, is switching their fleet to clean natural gas and with a big direction towards hydrogen in the future. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned before, affordability and equity issues are so important to this dialogue. And our research, we really looked at, how can we help customers get there? What is going to be the net impact to these customers of going all electric, and how do they get there? Well, one of the things that our studies found is that for folks who do adopt the electrification efforts, getting an EV, doing their, changing out their water and space heaters, they can hold their bills relatively the same because of the reduction in usage. However, folks who do not change to these EV or the electrification will see their bills go up. Now, this is data that doesn't include any sort of price hikes or anything. It's like, we understand rate hikes are part of the process, but there's not any sort of projection that's rolled into it. But you can see dollar for dollar that obviously folks who do not shift over to EVs, for example, are going to continue to pay at the pump. Okay, next slide. So for us, there's several key issues that there are opportunities. First of all, the opportunity here is that we're putting something out that really talks about reliability in this arena of electrification. And the key issues that really come to top are affordability, equity. How do we ensure that folks who generally would not go to this can get there, either because they're low income or some other way? Maybe they have space issues that they can't get all of that. How can we work with them to address their needs? Some of this will come through state support, some of it with federal support, but we need to keep an eye on them, as well as making sure that we have an equitable transition for our affected workforces. The second item is we want to prioritize the electric system reliability. Again, we can't get there unless the transition involves a growth in the grid to accommodate this change, massive change. We're also looking at suggesting a regional transmission organization that can help us look at where are we going to get the power? Is it going to come from Wyoming in terms of hydropower? Is it going to come from Arizona in terms of solar? And then how do we get that into the grid here? Some of you may remember we had a big battle as we were trying to get more transmission power coming through East County. So that's something that we'll look to get at. Additionally, in terms of local ordinances and regulations, we want to encourage faster permitting and really efforts to facilitate the deployment of new infrastructure to support these new uses. And lastly, this study also embraces opportunities for innovation and advancement. We want to recognize that maybe clean hydrogen is the answer today. Maybe something else will come forward in the few years. And so this is an ongoing study, and we're looking to have dialogues with the cities and its commissions, as well as other stakeholders, to continue to look at the path to net zero. So I'll pause there and try to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, hit your mic.
When I see the carbon capture and carbon removal, it looks like most of it is just due to the lack of using carbon fuels like gas and oil. Is the SDG also working, trying to help things that the planet does to blue carbon in lagoons or planting of trees and helping cities or people put those plants back in where we could use them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm very excited to say yes. In terms of sustainability, our own sustainability strategy that was published in 2020 talked about tree canopies and how can we get there. And actually, SDG&E has a tree donation program with an annual goal of 10,000 trees. Some of those trees are going to be a part of the city's Arbor Day celebration. So it's definitely, appreciate community member Parker's interest and city staff for engaging us. And that's exactly what we want to do, is look for those opportunities. Some of the trees, we might even be able to place a few in the Leucadia streetscape and stuff. So that's part of my role in staying close, being a liaison to the cities, and bringing those opportunities and local opportunities. So yeah, we'll keep at it. And carbon capture is a new technology in so many different fronts. So best ideas we can get will be important.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the 50 trees that you're providing the city for Arbor Day. So it's going to be great. And I actually have a map with me if you want to see where those trees are going to be planted. I did want to ask you, what is your definition of clean hydrogen?
Well, we're looking at green hydrogen, not blue hydrogen, to begin with. And so clearly, as the technology evolves, we're using it to generate power in some facilities. I think we've got one in Escondido that we're looking at, and as well in Borrego Springs, trying to increase storage on site through hydrogen in order to increase reliability. So in Borrego Springs, for example, I think, let's say, for instance, they have about 16 megawatts of demand at certain times of the year. They can literally, they have one line going into the community, and with weather, it can be disrupted, and transmission lines can be brought down in the Ranchita area. So we developed this microgrid, and we're continuing to add more capacity, more storage, more generation. There's solar out there already that we're using, but other technologies will continue to be embraced and tested to make sure that we can truly add it in the future.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, in your study, you talked about a certain number of non-adopters. And does your study have an expectation or forecast of like the percentage of the population are expected to be non-adopters?
It's interesting. Our Senior Vice President, Scott Kreider of Customer Care and External Affairs, just talked about that the other day. And he said, our goal out the door should be getting 5% of our customer base added to new solar and better energy efficiency programs. So how can we change that? Well, the change really has to start. But I'll have to look into that data point to see what we have, but it's no time like the present to get started. So that's a priority for us.
And then I have one more question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
that was really interesting to hear that we need 8 gigawatts of solar every year. And I wanted to know 2 things. It's like, what are your projections for adding, how much solar, utility-based solar, are you planning for the next several years?
Okay.
And then, can you get to 8 gigawatts of solar per year without a robust rooftop solar program?
Right, okay. In terms of our projections, I know that we have about 62 utility scale projects in the ground today. Those are some that we're using now. In terms of what that represents overall in that 8 gigawatt number for the state, that I don't have, but I can come back and get you that information. And then certainly, you know, where we are in California, that's also something that I have to get back to you on. Thank you. Yeah, that's, you know, it's an important issue. And this is kind of that crossroads where you're like, we need solar drastically. You know, combined with the affordability issues and equity issues, we need to work through that. So.
What affordability and equity issues?
Well, as you may be aware,
expand on that?
you know, the cost shift I'm speaking about in terms of the fact that non-solar customers probably pay about $285 a year to underwrite the cost of grid charges for solar customers.
You sure about that?
Yes?
Yeah, okay. I've been in the solar industry for 16 years.
Yep.
I worked with HECO in Hawaii for years when they shut down net metering. And I actually disagree wholeheartedly with the statement that non-solar customers are subsidizing solar customers. And you did say that. So, you know, it's, on the one hand, it's SDG&E wants to do solar as long as they control it, right? As long as we have these big utility scale projects, right? As long as we can get to net zero with people not controlling it and putting it on their house. Because SDG&E and PG&E are fighting in Sacramento right now, net metering. And that's the line they're using. And it's a big battle, and they're losing a little bit because the governor shut it down. So I love a lot of the things SDG&E is doing, but as someone that knows solar really well and knows what's going on, if SDG&E really wanted to get into net zero and had people, because the people that are going to be affected, and sorry, but I've been battling this for 16 years, so I know a lot about it, and I am passionate about it. And I appreciate you being here and talking about it, but I do need to speak my mind on this. The people that, the non-adopters are going to be people that are low income. That's who the non-adopters are going to be. And not, Joe, that you don't represent this or take this, but utilities are beholden to their shareholders, right? At the end of the day, they can do as much of this, they can give us 50 trees, but at the end of the day, the PUC, who was appointed by the governor, are the ones that put the things in place, right? And what Joe's doing is great. We need this, we want this program, and not to say that, but having utility scale solar, we need it all. We need utility scale, we need rooftop, and we need other things to get to net zero. Totally agree.
Right.
But to say that SDG&E really wants this, on the one hand, and they're fighting net metering up in Sacramento, and the things that are going on, it's tough to do. And they label it community solar, right? Because rather than putting solar on a rooftop, right, they'll put it in, as you mentioned, Arizona, right? We don't need to put solar in Arizona. We just need to put solar on the roof, right? So, and batteries are coming, and net metering shouldn't be 1 for 1, right? And I'm okay with that transition. But to just shut off net metering isn't the way to go. So I just needed to push back on a lot of things that you said in there, because I think the great thing is SDG&E charges us between 4 and 9, 55 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the highest rates in the country by far. So that makes a lot of people go solar. That's the good thing, right? But just for a frame of reference, in Hawaii, which is the second largest, it's 40 to 50 cents, or 30 to 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And between 4 and 9, we're charged 55 cents a kilowatt hour. The reason we're charged that much, I don't know why we're the most expensive in the country, but the reason that SDG&E does that is because what he's saying is during the day, people produce solar electricity, and when SDG&E needs most power is at night between that 4 and 9. So the time of use, we're going in the right direction, but, I would love to see more efforts of working to get people with rooftop solar, right? And then that allows, Stephen Chu, former Secretary of Energy, actually said this years ago. He said that the utilities, if they got on board and owned the solar and helped people, those low-income people that aren't going to be the adopters of being able to buy a $60,000 electric car, if they got them on board, then, we have something tangible. So, yeah, I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there. So I appreciate it, Joe, and I hate to beat you up a little bit, but I had to push back on some things there.
No, that's all right. I mean, it's every time you have a policy change, you're going to have different parties at the table advocating certain things. From our experience, this is what we've come across. It's also, some view of others in terms of the cost shift. But, like you said, it's still being worked on. It's going to be worked on outside of San Diego, and give us some answers that, follows all of that input that they've heard from all parties. So understand, appreciate that.
And just so everyone understands net metering, when we say net metering, that's when we can send a kilowatt hour back to SDG&E and get one as a credit back, a full credit, right? And right now, you can do that at any time. You can send a credit to SDG&E, or actually in all of California, it's called net metering. In Hawaii, they stopped doing that. And so now everybody has batteries. And we're probably going in that direction, but it should be kind of a scaled down. And right now, there's a battle in Sacramento where they're trying to, and I haven't seen it from SDG&E, but PG&E put things out that are kind of using that line of, they're subsidizing the people that have solar and some other things that I disagree with personally.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I guess on that same topic, what percentage of the 8 gigawatt that is projected to be needed every year, what percentage of that is expected to be rooftop solar that people to do themselves, and what percentage is expected to be, or is that 100% SDG&E's estimate for themselves?
No, I think it is a number of factors. I need to get that broken down.
Okay.
An earlier question as well. But, rooftop solar, in many cases, is going to need to be partnered with storage.
Yeah.
Right? We've got to keep that solar till sunset when we need more power.
Right.
And that's really the other piece that is so important. And we talk about permitting and all that, that's going to be a piece. But I'll have to come back with some more data.
Because it does seem like there is some compromise solution in there. I mean, battery storage is incredibly expensive. I was looking into it, and it doesn't pan out. But also, it's expensive to get rooftop solar, and so the idea that people that spend the money themselves to put it in, to me, they're subsidizing the people that aren't doing it, right? Because they're providing that electricity to the system at their expense, not to everyone else. So they may be paying $280 a year more for transmission fees, but I just put more solar and I'm paying thousands of dollars to get that put in. So
Right.
I think you look at the big picture. But I do agree also that solar people should pay something for the transmission, because I don't have storage, and I'm when the sun goes down, I still want energy. So I think there's a good compromise in there somewhere. It's probably not black and white.
Thank you.
And just an interesting note, last month, the utility in Hawaii, HECO, they're having to shut down a coal-fired power plant, right? And so they don't know where they're going to get electricity generation. They're paying people $4,000 for every battery that they install, so they can drain it from 6 to 8. It's called grid services programs. You probably know about them. And that's where things kind of are going now, is they're allowing people to do it, which is a good thing, right? Yep. And they're paying people to go solar. And it's a very interesting, because Hawaii is the canary in the coal mine, kind of.
Yeah. And We're looking at it a little bit as well, it's called virtual power plants. And so it's new technology for us geeks who like to research things, you know, that's one of the latest things out there. So thanks, that's a good point. Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Again, this information is found at sdgne.com/net0. If you want to look at our own sustainability plan, it's sdge.com/sustainability. So thank you again.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you coming out. Okay, next up is number 6, the approval of the March 10, 2022 minutes. Someone like to?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll second.
Motion's been made. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously passes. Informational items. Crystal, I think this is you.
Thank you. So the first item is the tentative presentation schedule. So I'll bring that up for you all to take a look at. So upcoming, we had Joe from SDG&E here today, which is great. And then next week, or next month, I'm sorry, we're looking at doing a tree canopy presentation from our arborist, our city arborist, Chris Calstrand. And then also actually 2 presentations that meeting date. We're also going to have a presentation from the city of Ocean regarding the city of Oceanside's proposed sand retention project. So 2 there, and then June 9th, we'll look at scheduling EDCO. And then if folks have any other ideas right now, we can take them.
Thank you, Crystal. Are those suggestions, are those just things people wanted, like the nuclear fusion fission? Do we have someone that in mind for that, or do you know?
You know, that's a good question. Can I defer?
I think that nuclear fusion and fission was a relic from going all the way back to Commissioner Eldon, who's been off the commission for a long time. So a lot of these were just topics that we've just kind of kept as a running tally of levels of interest. So if they're no longer topics that have interest to the commission, we'd be glad to just drop them off there. And if there's new topics, we can put those on there. And we would always encourage, the coordination of the presentations really is by you all, by the commissioners. So if there's a topic on here that you want to add just to kind of help us keep a running tally, we'd be glad to do that. Otherwise, feel free to reach out and get those speakers set up for future months.
So these are just reference points of information. Hey, if you find somebody that could talk about this subject.
You got it,
let
yeah.
us know.
And these are just topics that have come up over time, so,
Got it.
yeah.
I didn't know if that had to do with the San Onofre plant and how we had a couple speakers on that, and we wanted to
Yeah.
address that. I guess not.
No,
Cool. Thank you.
yep.
When are the environmental award winners going to be presented?
Yeah, so it sounds like we'll be ready for your meeting next month to announce that. And then with the subcommittee, we're coordinating when to go to city council with that announcement.
So they're not presented here, they're presented at city council?
The announcement will also be made at your meeting, and then at a subsequent city council meeting, the official, kind of like more formal presentation of what the award will be given.
Mayor gives it.
Okay, very good.
There is always an opportunity to invite those winners in to present as well to the commission at a future meeting. Because I think what we're talking about is just the presentation of the award. But if
Yeah.
you'd like them to come in and present on a topic or whatever their area of interest in, that's happened in the past as well too. That's why I brought it up.
Okay, any other thoughts? All right, so let's
Just a reminder, Crystal, to the new commissioners, if you have somebody you'd like to speak, you can email that to Crystal and Chamomile still, or just Crystal?
Yeah, you can start with me, and Chamomile is still supporting. Eventually, it will be Teddy Flanders, who's over there, who will be taking over for Chamomile.
It's Eddie.
So yeah, you can start with me, and of course, we have this informational item for you on the agenda for discussion, but you can always reach out to me outside of the meeting to discuss potential presentation ideas.
Yeah, so you can bring, if you want to, you can, the process for that is, bring it up in, what, agenda number 9, I think. Hey, I'm thinking of this speaker. Say, are you guys interested in that? And then, if you do have somebody, you can email it to Crystal. And we encourage that to happen because a former commissioner used to do a lot of that. So please, use your networks to bring in speakers.
So I actually have something that, I might. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to, if I can talk about it now or in the commissioner-initiated agenda items. So next month, we're having Chris Calstrand talk about tree canopies. And he's going to be talking about basically the status of the tree canopy in Encinitas. And what I'm interested in is trying to get how do we get this to mean something more in Encinitas? Is it possible to get an ordinance, or how do you go about that? And so I'm hoping to get, really it takes another discussion about how other cities or what's the best approach for this.
Yeah, so that's something that you could bring up under item 11, is that right, Eric? To begin discussing? Yeah, so if you want to maybe hold that thought, till that section, that'd be great. But when Chris Calstrand is here, he would be a great resource for you all to ask those kinds of questions at your meeting. But of course, you can always reach out to him beyond that, but for you as a commission, that'd be a great resource. Okay, are you all okay moving on to item B?
Yeah.
Okay. So item B is a presentation on the 2020 Climate Action Plan Annual Report and an update on where we're currently at with CAP implementation and coordination. So I'll start with the annual report. We just recently completed this in April, and it focuses on what the accomplishments were in the city as it relates to the climate action plan for the year 2020. That's where all the data is from. And then to complement that, we have our climate dashboard. So the dashboard is like an interactive annual report with all of the graphs and information there as well, that it's a little more accessible rather than in kind of a published PDF form. But they're both available on the city's website. So to start off, I'll just give you a little bit of background on the climate action plan and kind of where we start from in terms of the CAP. So what we look at initially when we go to kind of seek to reduce emissions is to identify what our emissions are in the first place. So this pie chart is a greenhouse gas inventory. This is the one for the city of Encinitas. This is for the data year 2016. It's our most current inventory. And it shows that a little more than half of our emissions come from transportation. About 20% come from electricity to our buildings. And then 14% is from natural gas that is used in our buildings. And then the remainder is a combination of emissions from solid waste, water, wastewater, and off-road transportation. So this is the different sectors that produce emissions that the city focuses on implementing projects and programs where we can aim to try to reduce those emissions that are caused. And then the Climate Action Plan also forecasts what our emissions might be as a community out into the future. We go out to the year 2030 with that forecast. And then based on that forecast, we've set targets on how much we want to reduce our emissions by to try to contribute to the global climate reductions that we all know we need to get to in order to have a cooler climate. So the dashed line is our business as usual emissions. This is what our emissions would be if we did nothing, if there was no federal and state legislation, if there was nothing the city did to try to reduce emissions. So as you see for our city, since we're mostly built out, that line is pretty flat, but it's not decreasing. So that's what we're trying to get to. The gray line, it demonstrates the additions of all of the federal and state legislation or laws that are either currently in place or will come on board over the years up to 2030 that will reduce emissions over time. So for example, this would be tailpipe emissions, getting cleaner cars, those federal requirements there. There's also another example, relative to the state, is that the state has renewable energy requirements for the electricity that comes from either the utility or another load-serving entity. So those are a couple examples of those. And then the green line even further reduces emissions, and that is the contribution of all the things that the city has in our climate action plan that get us to reduce our emissions that much further. And then the two red dots are our two target years which are 2020 and 2030, and those are kind of the target reductions that we're really trying to focus on between now and 2030. So this is a table that shows all of the climate action plan measures in our climate action plan, very summarized here. And it also shows our progress up to the year 2020. So this is kind of a summary of what the annual report presented. So there's two kind of progress columns because the 2020 status shows whether or not we started or where we were at in implementing that particular measure. And then the 2020 target column identifies whether or not we went so far in that implementation to actually achieve the 2020 target. So the exciting takeaway for me for these results is that we have so many of our measures that are in progress or even complete. Of all of the 20 measures, all but 2 of them are in process in some way, which after just a few years of implementing or adopting the climate action plan, I see that as pretty exciting that we're only, a few years into reaching that 2030 timeline, and we've already got a lot of things in motion, and several of them actually complete. So to me, that kind of bolsters the second column where we've got a lot of things in progress aiming to achieve that 2020 target, but not quite all of them were achieved. So there's a little bit of trade-off there in what we're working on versus, crossing that finish line at exactly that point, that 2020 year point. So I do see this as very exciting in that we're doing a lot of work in a lot of areas and trying to keep the balls moving in all of these areas. So the key accomplishments during the year 2020, the key things that staff was working on. The biggest thing as it relates to sustainability was a CAP update. So shortly after the CAP was adopted in 2018, we actually needed to do another update because of our housing element that had recently been completed, and then our active transportation plan that had been completed. Because those two planning documents were still in draft form when we completed the CAP, there were some gaps in our climate action plan. So we committed to going back and reopening the CAP and making it more complete once those documents were done. Because as you would assume, When there's more housing in your community, that can mean that there's increased greenhouse gas emissions from more energy being used in those homes, more people traveling to and from work. So we needed to account for those emissions in our climate action plan. And then since we had the climate action plan reopened, we also took a second look at the CAP measures and actually added some new ones and made some revisions to some of the existing measures. And most notably, the revisions that were made related to our new all-electric requirement for all new residential and commercial buildings. So that was folded into the CAP and then eventually became an ordinance last year and is very shortly going to be implemented this year. Also, something that happened in 2020 was the EV charging ordinance that was adopted late in 2019 went into effect on January 1 of 2020. So we had a full year of that ordinance being in effect. Also, on the community choice energy side of things, the year 2020 was kind of the bulkiest startup year for San Diego Community Power. That's when they did all of their work to identify how they were going to procure power, where they were going to get the money for those startup activities, building their staff, identifying consultants that would be helping them with their work. All of that was done in 2020. And then one thing that our city council did was voted to that for Encinitas customers in SDCP that their opt-in rate for their power would be 100% renewable. And we're the only member of all of the 5 cities in SDCP that made that choice, which is exciting, but also it'd be great if all the other cities did too. But it's great that we're kind of leading the way and kind of proof of concept that it's something that hopefully will be effective. So always customers can have the choice to opt down to 50% renewable or to opt out and get their power procured by SDG&E, which is a great option. But having 100% be the first option is a great way to kind of start at the top. The next key item that was in process during 2020 was our bike share program. So as you know now, it is up and running, and it's really exciting to see those bikes kind of going around town. But in 2020, it was still under development. And then the next item is active transportation implementation. So our CIP department is, I'd say, the bulk of their work these days is mobility related. They're putting in bike lanes, they're doing street calming measures. We've got our big marquee project right now, which is streetscape going in, and a lot of work going on related to that. So a lot of kind of on the ground, shovels in the ground work getting done for active transportation. And then this is kind of an ongoing thing, but we're continuing to transition to a zero emission vehicle municipal fleet. And so we're focusing on the light duty vehicles right now because there's so much availability with EVs and those types of vehicles. And our public works department is doing a great job at identifying that when a vehicle is ready for its retirement, that they seek EV options whenever possible. And 2020 was a big year for that. There were several all electric vehicles that were purchased for the city fleet. And then lastly, the zero waste program implementation. We've got an expert right here to the right of me. Public Works has been doing a lot, and 2020 was kind of one of the initiating years of really getting the organics program up and running. Now we've got curbside organic recycling that rolled out this past year in 2021, and it really was initiated in the year 2020. So let's dive a little bit more into some of the data. So this graph shows for every, so just to give you kind of the lay of the land for the annual report. So all of the measures, we attempt to get some really detailed graphical data like this to demonstrate our progress towards our numeric targets. Every CAP measure in the Climate Action Plan has a numeric greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. And those are associated with performance metrics. And so all of these graphs show the performance metrics, which then equate to emissions reduction. So that's why, for example, this metric here is in British thermal units. That's how we measure, it's a general measure of energy, combining electricity and natural gas into kind of one unit. So we're not necessarily measuring emissions here. We're looking at the emissions equivalent of what we stated we would do in our goal. So as you can see, this is a graph of all of our largest buildings in the city, our municipal buildings, and the energy they all use, and the targets compares to the targets that we set for the years 2020 and 2030 in terms of where we would get our energy reductions to. And as you can see, we've actually been under both our 2020 and 2030 targets ever since the year 2015. So we've been doing pretty well. Can always be more efficient, but we're definitely meeting our goals here, and that's exciting to see. So the next one is related to renewable energy. This graph shows the residential solar PV capacity in our city. And what's demonstrated here again is that we've got a lot of solar adoption in our city. It's been happening quite a bit, especially in the more recent last, between 2014 and 2020 has been kind of a continual gradual increase in the amount of solar that gets installed on rooftops. And we're definitely far achieving our goals here, much thanks to the community. No requirements or ordinances were in place when these solar systems were installed. So really hats off to the community for this one. Related to water efficiency and water consumption, and again, this is what Encinitas residents are doing. We measure here both water districts, the San Diego Water District and the Levenheim Municipal Water District, and we've gradually been decreasing in our water consumption, and consistently over the last couple of years. There was a little blip in 2019, but for 2020, it does look like we were under both the 2020 target and the 2030 target. And then for municipal renewable diesel consumption, this graph is interesting because in 2018, you see that stark change from diesel use to renewable diesel use. And that's when we actually switched vendors and switched to, the city bulk purchases diesel and stores it at our public works facility. And we actually have a vendor now that provides us with renewable diesel. So that is mostly what all of our heavy-duty vehicles are fueled by. If they have to go far beyond the facility, then they will refuel up if they're out of the region. Like, for example, if a fire truck or something is up in Northern California or something, they'll have to refuel differently. That's what that little blip in 2020 is for. But for the most part, they're able to refuel that renewable diesel, which is really exciting. I think this is the last one. Yeah, okay. So lastly is trees, which, again, this one is nice to see that we're far achieving our 2020 target and headed close to our 2030 target already. But one of the things we did in that interim update of our cap is we realized that we were actually installing many more trees than we thought that we were capable of doing as a city. We changed our annual goal from 50 net new trees being added to 100 net new trees being added each year in the city. And we're finding that so far we're easily able to do that and been able to do that each year. So that covers the annual report. And now I'll dive into current cap implementation and coordination. So this part of the presentation really stems from Commissioner Kramer's request to hear how the CAP staff coordinates with planning staff in the work to implement the cap. So that's that was a very specific request, and so what I thought I would do is make that a little more broad and really cover what the sustainability division does to coordinate with all of the departments to get the cap work done. So first I'll start with what the current sustainability efforts are, kind of like here and now as a kind of snapshot in time. So what we've been working on is the implementation of the Green Building Ordinance, which was adopted late last year and takes a lot of moving pieces to pull together to really make sure that the ordinance is effectively being implemented, that building permit applicants know what the requirements are, that there's a clear checklist for them to follow to ensure that their projects include all the requirements, things like that. Training is involved as well. So all those pieces are being worked on right now. We're also working on an EV charging station master plan. B-Cycle Bike Share just got rolled out early this year, and it's the first year as a pilot year, so staff is evaluating how successful it's been and how effective it is at getting more people out on bikes and out of their cars. We're also been doing more of an effort to install bike racks throughout the city, especially with the increased ridership of e-bikes. We've been trying to get more racks out there so that those bikes stay more organized. And then we're keeping tabs on the San Diego Community Power launch. They're in the final phases of their launch, and we're helping with public outreach and coordination as needed as a member city. Residents which is the last phase, municipal, commercial have already been launched, and residential is the last phase, and that's actually happening for our community this month. It started April 1st. So that folks are being opted in, and then the final portion of that is NEM customers, net energy metering customers. Those customers will be phased in during their true-up month, whatever month that is. It happens at a different month for every customer, so that'll occur throughout this calendar year. And the next is we're already going to get started on the 2021 CAP annual report. It's a really heavy lift to get these reports done, so we are already starting to get started on the next one. We're also looking at finishing out the revision of the Green Building Incentive Program. I know I've talked with the Environmental Commission about that a couple times, and we're finally getting the bandwidth in our division to start picking that back up again. And then the last one on the list here is we're working on an employee commute incentive policy to try to get our city staff to commute to the city in alternative ways. So maybe getting out of that single occupancy vehicle and carpooling, or maybe considering the purchase of an electric vehicle if there's an incentive behind that, and then either biking or walking or taking transit. So here's the CAP coordination kind of across the board throughout the entire city. These aren't all the departments, but they're the bulk of them, and the ones that I coordinate with quite a bit when it comes to CAP implementation. So I'd say this probably goes for the most part in order from left to right with who I coordinate with most and who from other departments help with CAP implementation. So of course, development services, which is where our planning staff work out of. That is where the bulk of the work happens for CAP implementation. There's efforts related to housing, mobility plans. We collaborate on green building codes and energy codes. That's where our CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, analysis for projects gets done, and part of that analysis includes development of greenhouse gas emissions impacts for projects and how those will get mitigated. And that's also where our Green Building Incentive Program is housed. So there's a lot of coordination back and forth between planning staff on these items and with me to to make sure that what the work that they're doing is in alignment with the climate action plan. Next is infrastructure and sustainability. This is the department that I'm in. So they do, like I said earlier, the bulk of the mobility projects, all of the shovels in the ground or paint that's being added to the asphalt to create bike lanes. That's where all of that engineering work happens. They also do traffic calming projects. They're the ones that design, I think I misspelled roundabouts. Routenabouts. Sorry about that. So they're the ones that design and install the roundabouts. There's several going in for streetscape. Those really help with making vehicle driving along streets much more efficient, so there's not the hard stops and starts, which the really aggressive starts are really what create increased emissions. So a roundabout eases that issue. And then bike rack installation occurs through this department. We try to instill sustainability kind of more generally within our CIP projects as well. Our coastal zone management program is also within this department, and within that division, they also look at addressing sea level rise for our city because we're a coastal city, and also climate adaptation in general. Next is Public Works. A lot's going on here as well. They also help with bike rack installation. They actually do the installation themselves with their own Public Works crews often, which is great. The Zero Waste and Organics program is being run out of our Public Works department. Zero Emission Fleet Coordination is also run out of Public Works. And municipal building energy efficiency and solar, that kind of analysis of how we can get our municipal buildings more efficient and possibly add solar, that analysis is being done out of our Public Works department. And of course, trees. Can't forget about our trees. So trees are split in our city in terms of who manages them between our streets division and our Parks and Rec department. So if they're along a street, then it's streets. If it's within a park, then Parks manages them. That's kind of the division of labor for our streets. So moving on to Parks and Rec, they manage bike outreach and make sure all our e-bikers and regular bikers out there have as much training and education and knowledge about bike safety as possible. And then they also help with bike rack installation. We've been adding some bike racks, new bike racks to some of our parks, and we'll continue to do that as the needs arise. They also help with public events like Cyclovia, EcoFest, and others. And with our special events, those are the ones that the private entities do. We also ensure there's requirements there to be sustainable as you put on those events. So like limitations on plastic water bottles and single-use plastics and things like that. And of course, they also have to follow our zero waste requirements and our organics requirements. So they help to manage that. And then finally, trees. Moving on, human resources. So here is focused on, of course, within the city, how we can be more sustainable there, and really here it focuses on commuting. That's the kind of the big push via human resources. So we have a program called that we utilize called iCommute. This is run out of Sandag, and the city takes advantage of that. They provide us with a lot of ideas and opportunities on how we can commute differently as employees. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be doing an even more robust employee commute incentive program here pretty soon. And then also considering telecommuting. And then second to last department here is information technology. So this department really helps a ton with our data collection and tracking and our analysis for our CAP and for our annual report. They're a huge help in this area. And then they also help with energy efficiency in terms of making sure that our equipment that we use is as efficient as possible. Buying printers that have energy efficient components to them, like, automatically going to sleep at night and not staying on, things like that. And then also waste reduction. They are big proponents of electronic everything, which is fantastic, less paper. So that's been really great especially there was this really big push with COVID to make everything online. And that was a win-win in my mind. It helped us to be able to work from home, and it helped us to be more sustainable. So it was great. And then lastly, media production. We've been being a little bit more creative about how we reach out to the community. And one of the ways that we're doing that is creating more videos, and we've started to do those videos in-house. So that's been kind of fun. And then lastly, I even coordinate with the city manager's department. That's where our public information officer resides. And so I work quite closely with her to do outreach. And then, of course, if you ever need to coordinate directly with city council, it's through the city manager's office. So a lot of cross coordination. Every staff person in the city knows about the climate action plan and how sustainable we're intended to be. So I'm happy to report that there's a lot going on and a lot of coordination here. And then my last slide is on external coordination, and I'll just be brief here, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the many outside organizations that the city collaborates with to really kind of bolster our sustainability and really kind of learn best practices and be more efficient with our collaborative efforts or partnerships that we can establish to do that much more for sustainability and emissions reduction. So we collaborate with our Main Street associations in the city. We coordinate directly with residents and businesses and outreach to them. We are part of the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative, which is a group of municipalities and various other organizations that focus on climate work. And then, of course, SANDAG and NCTD, our transit agencies, we work closely with them. All ranges of government, even schools, state, county, cities, and even schools we coordinate with. Of course, San Diego Community Power is on this list. Our utility, SDG&E, of course, we closely coordinate with them. In fact, I'm getting some significant support from SDG&E's REACH codes team to implement our green building ordinance, which has been fantastic. And then trades organizations as well, like the Building Industry Association. Environmental advocacy organizations have been a great partner. We work closely with EcoFest that gets put on in our community every year, as an example. And then finally, water districts. So that kind of rounds it out and summarizes the level of coordination that needs to happen for our climate action plan and kind of what regularly happens to get that done. And lastly, shameless plug, the Climate Action Campaign just came out with their CAP annual report card yesterday. They grade every city's climate action plan and their progress on implementation. And Encinitas scored an 82, which seems like, that's like a B. But the next highest, we were the second highest ranked city. So beside Escondido received the highest rank this year, and Encinitas was second. So I think this community and the city should be really proud of the CAP that we've developed and the work that we're doing. As quoted in their report, Encinitas continues to stand out for its work on clean energy and zero waste. The city has been a consistent regional leader in prioritizing budget and investments toward CAP implementation. So really, I think the Environmental Commission should share in this, accomplishment, the work that you do and the work that you put out through this commission is definitely a part of this score, this grade. And it's great to see that our city does so much. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Crystal, for presenting. There's a lot there, and I don't know if some of the new commissioners have seen, but we are one of the leaders, and it's thanks to Crystal and our city council and some of the past commissioners. And it's, something we should be proud of for sure. Thanks for the great work, Crystal. Any questions or comments?
I was going to ask one question. A resident, maybe even me, who might be getting an electric vehicle, I was curious, is there online or a step-by-step how to navigate through the city to get the permitting process through SDG&E from the power box to, let's say, the curbside? Does that already exist for a layperson to try to navigate through to get from A to Z to get that completed?
Yeah, there is some online information about how to get a permit for an EV charging station at your home. It's called the Customer Self-Service Portal, and there is an EV charging station permit. And we do have a streamlining process for that, so it should be a pretty quick process. If you want, Mark, you can email me, and I'd be happy to direct you to those direct links if you can't find it
Fantastic.
super quickly.
Thank you.
I have some questions.
Sure.
The first one was about the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory. So I think it was the second slide of your first project presentation.
That one?
No, the graph, the next one. There.
That one, the forecast and
Yeah, 'cause
targets?
I don't really know where we were in 2020 on this. I mean, because the gray and the green are forecasted, or are they actual?
Yeah, those are forecast.
So is there an
and-
actual for 2020?
So there is not. That's a really good question. The reason why is that those inventories, those are done for us by Sandag, and they have yet to publish their latest inventory. The latest inventory we have is from this data year 2016.
Wow.
This inventory was done in 2018, and even in the year that you collect the information for that inventory, it still is usually at least a couple years old, and that's because how all of the data that goes into an inventory is collected and the timing of all of that. The biggest data piece that's the most difficult is transportation. That data comes from our regional transportation model that Sandag maintains, and they're usually a couple years behind, or not. Behind is not the right word. I mean, their process is their process, and the data is usually, the most current data is usually about 2 years old. So there's always going to be that lag. So unfortunately, that means in our 2020 CAP annual report, we don't have an inventory for the year 2020 quite yet.
Okay, so stay on this slide. With the 20% electricity, component to the greenhouse gas. How has it been forecasted by San Diego Community Power or you guys, how the CCE will affect this?
Yeah, so that, if I can actually jump to the next slide, that is built into this forecast here. So the green line does take that into account. That takes into account that we would gradually get to 100% by 2030. So in reality, what happened though is that in the year 2020, we opted to have our automatic opt-in rate be 100% renewable. So that might actually make the reality of that green line dip much more quickly early on and then be flatter towards 2030. Does that make sense?
Okay. And then another question about this graph.
Okay.
It seems like we need more stringent target to get to 50% greenhouse gas reduction.
To do more?
Yeah, and because, I mean, unless, I'm not exactly sure when they keep talking about 50% reduction of greenhouse gases, if that is considered from 1990 or if that's 2012. So that changes all the
Yeah,
numbers.
it depends on what your baseline year is that you're
Right.
comparing to. Yeah. So how we call this the
Because according to this, from 2012, we're not at 50% reduction yet.
yeah, we're at about, our target is 41% by 2030 from our baseline year, which is 2012. So yeah, so that's actually your question is timely because we're about to embark on another CAP update. And that's the perfect time to reevaluate these targets and think maybe we should be doing more, or maybe we should be forecasting further to 2045 and really targeting an emissions target that's even lower. That's something that will be considered as we do that CAP update.
And okay, so that was my next question, is when is the time for me as a commissioner to make any suggestions for this?
During the CAP update would be a great time. So as we do that CAP update, I'll be coming to the commission quite frequently with updates and gathering your input, and that would be a great time.
Okay.
We had a lot of back and forth with the Environmental Commission when we did the first adoption of the Climate Action Plan.
And then I just have one little clarification.
Sure.
On the difference between public works trees and parks trees.
Oh, sure.
Because, so public work trees are actually parks, all the parks, and all the street medians. So it's anything irrigated. So all the street medians, like on El Camino Real.
Yeah.
That's all park trees. And also the
Oh.
trees on Leucadia that are irrigated, that's all park trees.
Oh, so if it's part of more of a.
So if it's irrigated, it's
Oh.
parks.
So-
So street trees are basically just the, I forget what they call it, the little ribbon of land along the street.
Okay,
That is not necessarily irrigated.
got it.
So-
Okay, thank you for educating me. I
Yeah,
didn't
'cause
know that.
Actually, a lot of the median trees are really visible.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Crystal, I think you have the next
All right.
work plan.
So next is action items, and we'll take a look at your work plan. Okay. Oh, hold on. Okay, so here is the Environmental Commission work plan. So the new items are in red, and that's just what I'll focus on in this presentation. So, or not really a presentation, just review, we'll say. Okay, so for item 2, community outreach. So there was a revision to the date of the EcoFest volunteer kickoff event. That will be occurring Sunday, April 24th. And then on April 16th will be an Earth Day cleanup event hosted by Surfrider and supported by the city and EcoFest. There's also another event that I'll just mention, another great event, which is Encinitas Arbor Day, and that's on April 30th. There were no changes to that one, but definitely it's coming up, so I'll mention that one as well. And then moving down the line, there was an update to CAP implementation. I added here that related to Ordinance 21-13, that's our green building ordinance. We're yet again still waiting for the California Energy Commission to accept our ordinance and deem it to be cost effective. And we're looking at hopefully being on their agenda for their April 26th business meeting. We should know within a matter of days if that's going to happen. And then in March, staff completed our 2020 CAP annual report. All annual report information has been incorporated into the city's dashboard as well, which can be viewed at www.encinitasenvironment.org. And then at our item 10, which was vegetation management, we added that a joint meeting with the Environmental Commission, Planning Commission, and the Urban Forest Advisory Committee was held on March 31st. And I think that's it. Yep, that covers the updates to your work plan and the work that was done within the last month. Any questions?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you,
So,
Crystal.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Moving on to number 9, commissioner-initiated agenda items.
Oh, point of order.
Sorry.
That was an action item, so we do need an approval of the
vote.
work plan if there are no
Thank
additions.
you,
to-
Chamomile.
Sorry, guys, I should have caught that.
I should have too. Thank God we got chamomile here. So, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the work plan as it was updated by Crystal.
I'll second it.
We have a first and a second. All in favor of approving the work plan?
Aye.
Unanimous. We good? Now we can move on? So number 9, commissioner-initiated agenda items. Do we have any? No. Okay. Moving on. Number 10, updated items of interest to the commission, announcements by commission members or staff.
I have one. Last meeting, Dr. Novotny gave us a presentation on cigarette butt pollution and the marine environment, and we discussed it as a group, and I was directed to move forward with a resolution to support AB 1690, a bill that was going to remove the cigarette filter off the cigarette and to also make vaping products less single use. A draft was created and just being sent up for proofing when in committee at the state level, those assembly members working on that committee opted to drop cigarette butts out of AB 1690 and just focus on vaping cartridges. So at this point, I'm dropping the resolution to council to support the bill, since the biggest marine environmental problem was the cigarette butt aspect, and we don't have a lot of data on collecting cartridges out of the ocean, so there will be no resolution. So I would like to put on maybe the next meeting an agenda item to discuss alternatives. I think Dr. Novotny mentioned some in this state. Sometimes cities have to piecemeal work to get the state's attention, and many cities have either passed no smoking bans or banning the sales of tobacco altogether. So at a future meeting, I'd like to discuss those with the commissioners and see if there's any unity in moving forward on any of those type of projects or ordinances. So.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Connor. How would be the process of Commissioner O'Connor putting that on for discussion at a later meeting?
So Eric can confirm this, but I believe it would be under item 11, future commissioner initiated items. That's where you would bring it up at a future meeting and have some discussion on it and ask if it's something that would be of interest to the commission. Anything else you want to add, Eric?
Yeah, so I think you, depending on which direction it goes, you might be kind of past 11. You know,
Okay.
it sounds like it's kind of socialized a little bit with the commission, and you've there's been some express interest. So essentially, the way that I'm hearing it described, you probably want to bring it forward under number 9 as a commissioner-initiated agenda item. If you want to talk about options and kind of discuss that back and forth amongst the commission, you just basically write up an agenda report, identify what those options are, and then you have the opportunity at that point to have an open dialogue to explore those amongst the commission. If there's kind of a consensus or direction that the commission wants to go, then you, Commissioner O'Connor, and if you needed support, maybe there's an ask for additional support from other commissioners at that time, then you go off and you develop it and bring it forward as a recommendation to the commission at a future meeting.
Thank you for that advice.
Yeah, and you can do that through Crystal, initially. Thank you, Eric and Crystal.
Commissioner, Coordinator Meadow here, just wanted to segue into the 2 back-to-back beach cleanups we have. I wanted to thank Surfrider and I Love a Clean San Diego. Surfrider routinely cleans Moonlight Beach. The number one thing found is unfortunately cigarette butts. And so there will be a cleanup this weekend on the 16th at Moonlight Beach with Surfrider and the city of Encinitas. And Crystal will be there with her Civic Spark Fellow. And then the following Saturday, April 23rd from 9 to noon, is the Creek to Bay cleanup. You can go to creektobay.org, and it's countywide. There are almost 100 sites. One of them is at Moonlight Beach at the Overlook. And so 2 back-to-back opportunities to do a beach cleanup and remove those harmful cigarette butts from our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chamomile. A lot going on around Earth Day, right? Any other updates?
I understand that it's Commissioner Switzler's birthday,
Oh, happy birthday.
so a collective on the record happy birthday might be.
Thank you, I appreciate that, on the record, yep.
Can we sing?
I don't know if we've ever sang. After, yeah. Okay. Moving on to number 11, future commission-initiated agenda items.
I think what I talked about for tree canopy goal for the city, I think probably be best to bring it up next time. Do you think that's more proper?
With the presentation.
After Chris's presentation?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That'd be a good segue. I need to have probably some good information from Chris to discuss.
Okay.
Anybody else? I wanted to ask, I don't know if this is the right spot, but if we wanted to have more cyclovias, like more than just one a year, what's the best way for the commission to approach that? It's on the work plan. Was it just within the subcommittee? Bring it to a meeting?
Yeah, you could maybe start just inquiring with staff now that leads the one, Nick Buck, and see, explore that idea with him to just gather kind of information gathering. And then you would bring it up at an environmental commission and I don't know, Nick would know what the staff capacity is for additional events, and then you could gauge whether, if you wanted to take on more as a commission, then you could go down that path.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Any others? Okay, moving on to 11. I'm sorry, to 12. All in favor, adjourn?
Aye.
We get to do this every 6 months. Meeting adjourned.
then we